But, obviously I was going to talk to a Labour spokesman on this, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor. She popped in and, again, I started by asking her about the fact that benefits, universal credit, haven't been increased. And I asked her then, had the government made a mistake and, what would Labour have done?
So what you could do is and I'm surprised the Chancellor didn't say anything about this today, is that you could bring forward some of the pension and benefit increase due next year and pay it this year, because this is when the cost of living crisis is really going to bite. So it's not about spending additional money, it's about bringing forward some of next year's increase and doing that now.
Although you keep that increase, wouldn't you? So there would be some additional money spent.
Well, it depends how you do it, but you could say, you could average out the inflation rates. Inflation is likely to fall back, and so next year's benefits would be go up by a lesser amount than it otherwise would. So you could even it out, but the cost of living crisis is biting now, and that's when we need the increase, both to pensions and to other benefits. Because, I mean, in my constituency in Leeds West, I'm already getting letters from people saying, I had one, we're a two-earner household and we can't afford the bills right now. Two-earner household. I had a pensioner who wrote to me. He said, I've got through all these years, but I've just seen what my gas and electricity bill is going to go to next month. I don't know how I'm going to afford it. It is dominating the correspondence I'm getting from constituents, and that's even before the price hike goes up in April. And the Chancellor said nothing to those people today. It was a real missed opportunity, both on the windfall tax and that wider support to some of the poorest in society.
Now, I've just interviewed the Treasury Chief Secretary, and I pointed out that, nurses, teachers suffer from the years of pay restraint, from austerity. They've just had really appalling challenges during, the COVID years. He said, I put to him, their pay, they will feel, needs to go up by the rate of inflation. He says no. He says there should be pay restraint. Do you think they should get inflation-protecting pay rises?
I think the key thing is to get a grip of inflation, because why are workers in the public and the private sector asking for higher pay? It's because the cost of living...
Should they get that higher pay? Because, these people do absolutely invaluable jobs. They're not exactly, multi-millionaires. Shouldn't their pay go up by inflation?
People in the public and private sector who are key workers do really important jobs, and they're all being affected by the rising cost of living. My point is that we need to tackle that inflation. That's why I've said that, for example, you should take VAT off domestic gas and electricity bills. That's why we would expand the warm homes discount to ensure that people can afford to pay their bills. We've got to get a grip of inflation, because unless we do that, we're going to get into this vicious spiral. Now, those pay negotiations...
But you seem to be saying no, they shouldn't have their pay fully protected for inflation.
Well, those pay negotiations are going on at the moment between the employers and the trade unions and the workers. That's happening at the moment. We'll see what that recommends. Of course, we all want to see pay rises for workers, but the way to do that, I think, is by getting a grip of inflation. And there was nothing in the spring statement today that actually gets a grip of inflation. Inflation is continuing to arise, as you say, through the course of this year. It's already the highest level in 40 years, and that is what is eroding pay, not just in the public sector, but for private sector workers as well.
Now, don't go away, because that's only half of the Rachel Reeves interviews. More from her after the break. I'll also be speaking to the President of Georgia, and indeed more with Ed Balls and Mark Harper about whether the Chancellor has done enough to help us through this dreadful economic crisis. Now, welcome back. In the second part of my interview with the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, I pointed out to her that interest rate increases to control inflation that are expected to be made by the Bank of England in coming months would hit poor people especially hard. And if what we're witnessing is a structural change in the economy, there is an argument, and I've heard this from serious economists, that the bank's inflation target should be suspended till we get through this change. So what does she think?
Look, I don't think it would be right for a Chancellor or a Shadow Chancellor to comment on those decisions made by the Bank of England. That
But
is
if you're
why
Chancellor,
you delegate
you would
responsibility.
have to, no, but the point
no,
is,
and I would
you would have to decide whether or not the inflation target gets changed.
No, the inflation target should stay, and the Bank of England should keep its operational independence. Take that decision out of the hands of chancellors and governments and give that to the Bank of England, who I think have done a good job since that operational independence in 1998. And I think it takes the politics out of some of those interest rate decisions.
One final question. There are some who say that Labour doesn't think enough about the problems of young people. One of the really striking things in the government's own numbers today is quite how much money they will be making from changing the payment terms on student loans. Would Labour do what the government is doing and stick with those much more onerous repayment terms?
Well, for young people, for young graduates, it's billions of pounds extra, effectively, in tax and repaying that student debt over a number of years. I think we were all quite surprised when we saw those numbers today of quite how much money is being taken from the pockets of,
so what do you think?
Young people.
Is that the right thing for the government
to do?
Well,
I've got to say, I was quite surprised by those numbers, and I want to look in more detail at those to see what can be done to help everybody. Because, look, ordinary working people are facing the biggest tax burden for 70 years now. And for all the action that the Chancellor took today, for every £6 this Chancellor has raised in taxes, he's only given £1 back today. And this is all happening when the cost of living crisis reaches its crescendo. I want to ease that burden on ordinary working people, whether that is young people in their first job or older people coming towards the end of their careers. And this Chancellor just keeps on whacking up taxes on working people.
Rachel Reeves, really good to see you.
And you, Robert.